Okay, let's go.
Guys, alright? Welcome everyone. The story begins in the United States in 1936. Otto and Helga Wallner are a German couple with 2 children, Carl and Lise. The family lives on the farm they built in Virginia and leads a quiet life until one day a letter arrives from Berlin about the historian Richard Wirth, who studies the lineage of German families in America and wants to rent one of the rooms at the Wallner farm. Helga feels a bit apprehensive, but the offer is very generous, and their children get excited upon seeing that the letter already came with a hefty advance. Deciding to accept the deal, the family prepares to receive the historian, and his luggage begins to arrive little by little. Helping her parents with the tidying up, Lise finds a very old book with macabre illustrations. A few days later, Richard arrives at the farm late at night and is invited to dinner. He finds it strange that the couple speaks English with their children, and Otto explains that it is necessary because Lise attends school and he himself goes into town for business. Masking his disapproval, Richard states that soon the whole world will be speaking German. Not quite understanding this prediction, Otto shifts the conversation to their guest's academic life. Richard then begins to talk about how the Vikings arrived in America long before Columbus and left some of their runestones there, like the one that was unearthed during the construction of the Wallner farm. Otto is astonished that Richard knows about the stone and says it is still in the barn, as it was used as a foundation. Helga dislikes this conversation, and after dinner, she tells Otto that they should have asked more questions about this man before agreeing to take him in. And that is because she does not yet know that he carries a skeleton inside his suitcase, along with some kind of dagger. The next day, Lise is crying in the barn when Richard arrives unexpectedly. He asks to see the runestone and is fascinated by the relic, especially upon seeing a very familiar symbol at its center. Noticing the girl is sad about the death of her bird, he asks her to come closer and holds the bird in his hands, whispering a dark mantra in an unknown language. The bird opens its eyes and starts moving again after a few seconds, but Richard warns that it will not last long. He still needs much more practice before he can truly master the art of his ancestors and become capable of defying death indefinitely. He promises the girl that he will use this power to protect her family and prevent them from ending up like the bird. Taking the dagger from his pocket, he tells her he will also need her help and that it will hurt just a little. Time passes, and now it is 2007. Evan Marshall is a paramedic with a very difficult life. In addition to his stressful job, he has to take care of his elderly father, who still blames him for the loss of his other son. Victor was a war hero who returned from Iraq 2 years ago and soon after disappeared during an outing with his brother. The two had gone fishing in the Town Creek area, and Victor never came back. Now Evan lives in a trailer in his father's backyard and does what he can to ignore his resentment. At the end of the day, his nephews call anxiously, as it is Halloween, and Evan promised to take them trick-or-treating. He lies that he had not forgotten and rushes to join the 2 kids. Passing by the cemetery, he takes the opportunity to visit the gravestone he had placed before Victor's empty grave. However, his sister-in-law Barb gets very angry upon learning that the 3 visited him. Like Evan's father, she refuses to believe Victor is gone and complains about Evan's haste in declaring him dead. When Evan returns home, the radio news announces that a rare lunar eclipse will occur the next night. Later that night, Evan wakes up to find a bearded man covering his mouth. Dazed, it takes him a few moments to recognize his brother Victor. He asks Evan to help him without asking questions and to prepare the truck for a trip. They will need to bring a canoe, all available weapons, and food for 2 days. While Victor freshens up, Evan gathers everything he asked for and asks his colleague to take care of his father while he is away. Once everything is ready, the 2 brothers get in the car, and Victor says their destination is Town Creek. Evan asks if this is some kind of revenge and if there will be a shootout involved, but his brother does not answer. Upon arriving at their destination, Victor warns that this is the point of no return and says he can continue alone if Evan prefers to turn back. Seeing the shackle marks around his brother's wrists, Evan deduces that Victor had been held captive all this time and decides to help him settle the score. The next stretch of the journey is made by canoe, and the 2 pass by a young mother putting up posters in search of her missing husband. After crossing the river, Evan starts talking about the last time they were there and tries to explain his efforts to find his brother, but Victor is entirely focused on the mission. They walk for 2 hours until they reach Creek Valley and jump over a fence covered in aggressive warnings against trespassers. We see that this is the Wallner farm, and a group of people is saying goodbye to someone. Victor says that is the father and that he will not be back until nightfall. Evan hesitates for a moment, as he did not know they were about to attack a family, but refocuses on the mission when his brother shows him what they did to his back. At that moment, the intruder's presence is detected by the animals. The horses start whinnying, and a dog attacks Evan's arm. Victor rushes to help him, using a knife to neutralize the animal. After recovering and injecting himself with a rabies shot, the duo splits up to surround the house. While Victor enters through the front, Evan keeps watch at the back and sees a young man stepping out to get firewood. Then a girl appears at the second-floor window, spots the intruder, and quickly runs to raise the alarm. When Victor enters the kitchen and holds an older woman at gunpoint, the young man appears behind him and strikes his head. The two begin to fight, struggling over the rifle, until the young man pulls out a knife. He is about to stab Victor but staggers backward when he is shot in the shoulder. He stumbles through the back door and collapses when Evan shoots him in the chest. Then we discover that the woman in the kitchen is Helga Wallner. The fallen young man is her son, Carl, and Lise is the girl upstairs. Victor goes up the stairs, leaving his brother with Helga, while Carl, still alive, starts dragging himself across the yard with a key ring on his belt. Evan decides to go upstairs as well and ends up finding Lise in her room. Struck by her beauty and innocent demeanor, he tells her to hide and says he will try to calm his brother down. However, Lise attempts to attack him with that strange dagger that once belonged to Richard before fleeing. Running down the stairs, she finds herself cornered by the brothers for a moment but manages to slip past them and rush outside. Carl is still crawling toward the barn and shouts for his sister to release someone, but Victor and Evan grab Lise before she can reach the keys. Evan takes her back inside while Victor searches the barn but finds nothing. Then he walks around the fence and finds a black container that triggers terrible memories. Opening the door, he hears a pained and horrifyingly familiar groan. This ignites his fury, and he decides to confront Helga and Lise about his enemy, accusing them of being accomplices in his atrocities. Evan still does not understand anything, and his confusion only worsens when the two women start speaking of this man as an unparalleled threat. Helga says it is time for dinner and that he will find it strange if they take too long, while Lise warns that Victor does not know what he is doing. Without explaining anything, Victor orders Evan to tie them up and goes to finish off Carl, finally noticing the keys. Though injured from the fight, Evan tries to remain civil with his captives but is shocked to find a photograph of the two dated 1940. Seeing his reaction, Lise simply states that time does not affect the Wallners. At the same time, we see that Otto has arrived in a neighboring town and is trading goods. The shop attendant comments that his truck is nearly a relic, praising his care for it. Back at the farm, Victor panics when he sees his brother heading toward the container and tries to stop him, but Evan is tired of all the secrecy. Opening the door, he sees someone bound and gagged inside. His name is Luke Benny, and he says he was kidnapped in the woods about a week ago. Evan tells him he saw his wife putting up missing posters for him. Unable to free him, Evan goes to get tools and ends up arguing with his brother along the way. Victor remains obsessed with revenge, but Evan refuses to deny help to an innocent man. Looking for something sharp, he enters the barn, where a huge symbol is painted on the wall. Victor takes advantage of the moment to grab Carl's keys and goes to a trapdoor beside it, desperately trying to unlock it. Evan, overcome with curiosity, opens the door marked with the symbol and finds a series of ropes and chains hanging from the ceiling, along with part of a skeleton. Otto is already approaching the farm when Evan returns to the container and frees the prisoner. He takes him inside while Victor greets the farmer with gunfire. Hit, Otto loses control of the truck and crashes into the trapdoor, causing the vehicle to overturn. Victor pulls him out and demands to know where his enemy is. Otto does not answer and reacts very strangely upon seeing his son lying in the yard. Like Lise, he also says that Victor does not know what he has done and urges both of them to run while they still can. It is then that the floorboards of the trapdoor burst outward, and a light begins to emanate from the basement. The figure emerging from there has the shape of a man, but Victor's gunshots don't seem to harm him. Otto warns that the shots are useless and suggests they run, explaining that this thing cannot enter the house. The two brothers accept the advice, and even the horses flee the barn, extremely agitated. The man's face hardly looks human, and we see that his hands are claws as he attacks one of the horses. Leaning over the animal, he begins chanting a mantra in an unknown language. Meanwhile, Otto reveals that this terrifying sorcerer was once a man named Richard Worth and explains that the symbols painted on the windows are what prevent his entry. Knowing this, Richard resurrects the horses to control them. One of them shatters a window and bites Luke by the shoulder before dragging him outside. Another horse breaks into the kitchen from the opposite side shortly afterward. Like their master, they are immune to bullets, and Evan only manages to scare one off with fire. In panic, the Walners begin sealing the entrances, painting the same runes again. Luke managed to escape and hides beneath the floorboards. Richard walks past him and goes to Carl's body, chanting the same mantra until Carl's eye opens. Inside the house, Otto explains the tragic story and says that his family was deceived by the Nazis. Richard was sent to develop occult practices, and only Lise was able to contain him with the runes. Since then, the four of them have been Richard's jailers, but also his prisoners. The story is interrupted by Carl, and Otto doesn't suspect anything when he sees his son entering through the front door. He rushes to hug him, and Carl stabs him with a knife. Helga and Lise begin to scream as he advances. Evan and Victor lure the undead upstairs, but leave the two women still tied up, unaware that Richard is repeating the mantra right outside the house. The two women scream for help as Otto starts to rise. Upstairs, the brothers eventually split up, and Evan finds the dagger Lise dropped. When Otto appears at the door and begins to attack him, he uses the dagger to defend himself. Meanwhile, Victor finishes killing Carl with a fireplace poker and also kills Otto when he rises one last time. Locking the two zombies in a room, the brothers head downstairs, where Helga is feeling unwell. Ignoring his brother's complaints, Evan decides to go for his backpack to help her, even though he has to risk going outside while Richard circles the house on horseback. Dodging the zombie horses, Evan grabs the backpack, and Richard abandons his mount to follow him, nearly managing to get inside. Frustrated, he knocks over the generator and cuts off the house's power, leaving everyone even more terrified. Victor continues pressuring Lise for answers, and she finally shows him her back, revealing she was the first victim. Richard began feeding on her as soon as he arrived, and Carl tried to kill him when he found out. However, Richard had already surpassed human limits, and it was too late to defeat him. Despite understanding her better, Victor still rebels upon confirming that it is the Walners who kidnap innocents to feed the monster. However, Lise says this contains his wrath, preventing even worse damage. When Victor sees the sorcerer heading to the basement, he thinks he is giving up, but Lise explains that he is going to the stone, as it makes him even stronger. Since his arrival at the farm, Richard has been trying to complete a specific ritual. Lise says that they never give him enough blood for it, as the ritual will make him invincible. She grabs that old book and shows Victor the image of a man with 3 eyes, saying that this is Richard's goal and that the transformation can only happen during a lunar eclipse. Very weak, Helga recalls that there is one more protection besides the runes. Richard brought his ancestors' bones from Germany and built a kind of armor he used to wear during the rituals until Lise stole it. Richard cannot harm the bones of his lineage, and therefore, whoever wears it will be safe. The only problem is that the armor is in that part of the barn that Evan found earlier. To cover Victor, Evan and Lise throw all the books into the yard and begin calling out to the sorcerer before setting them on fire. Richard takes the bait, but the horses begin to whinny when Victor runs toward the barn. Realizing the plan, Luke emerges from his hiding place and tries to face Richard, not realizing his terrible mistake. His sacrifice only contributes to the sorcerer's ritual, which, without him, would not have enough blood for the eclipse. Seeing this, Lise brings the rifle to Evan, who is confused as he hears her asking him to shoot, knowing the bullets won't work. The situation intensifies as Lise explains to Evan that he must aim at Luke, since Richard cannot feed on the dead. Evan is horrified but has little choice and obeys. Unfortunately, Richard is now far stronger than before and even reveals his true face to confront his enemies. At the same time, Victor puts on the bone armor, and Lise notices that the eclipse is beginning. Evan steps onto the balcony and finds Luke under the spell, asking to be locked away somewhere where he can't hurt anyone. Meanwhile, Richard and Victor are facing off in the barn. The sorcerer bypasses the skeleton's protection with the same trick as before and resurrects the dog to attack Victor in his place. He then positions one of the bones in the center of his own forehead and begins hammering it, releasing a disgusting liquid. The moon is now almost fully covered, and Victor is still fighting with the dog. In a moment of distraction, Richard manages to strike Victor in the back. However, Victor decides to play by the new rules and uses his own blood to paint a symbol on his forehead. This allows him to mount one of the horses and carry the armor, now nearly falling apart, to the house door. He shouts at Evan to grab the bones and lights a torch, continuing to ride until Richard intercepts him. The horse collapses to the ground, and the fire begins to spread across the grass. Meanwhile, Evan and Lise grind the bones and begin to plan a trap. Evan asks her to repeat the usual ritual, making incisions on his back. Victor is still on the ground when Richard tells him that everything happening is part of his plan. No other victim has escaped the container in all these years. Victor only succeeded because that's what Richard wanted. He sensed Victor's hatred and knew he would seek revenge. That's why he allowed him to escape just before the eclipse, counting on his return to destabilize the Walners. Without Victor, he would never have left the basement, and this moment of glory wouldn't have been possible. In the container, Lise prepares Evan just as she always did with the other victims. However, this time, she rubs the crushed bones along the incisions, hoping Richard will consume the remains of his own family. Then, the moon vanishes from the sky, and the sorcerer sheds another layer of skin. The hole in his forehead begins to widen, and the third eye emerges. Now, the only thing left to complete the ritual is more blood. At that moment, Lise rings the bell in the yard, summoning the sorcerer to the feast. In a cruel tone, he tells Victor that the reward for such bravery will be losing his brother. Richard runs to the container while Victor drags himself through the grass to stop him. Lise watches from the window as she hears loud knocks on the bedroom door. Realizing that Luke is trying to enter, she runs and looks for a place to hide. Richard begins to feed on Evan while Luke chases Lise through the house, and Victor is trapped in the wire fences. Only after several gulps does the sorcerer realize that he's fallen into a trap. The remains of his ancestors act as poison to him, and he begins to feel the negative effects. Evan seizes the chance to attack him. Lise is in a room with her mother, listening to Luke break down the door. Helga says that their time has finally come and that they must accept what has long been postponed. But Lise doesn't give up and tries to open another door, being startled when her brother falls through the crack. Luke manages to invade the room just as Richard regains his strength to finish off Evan. However, Victor also manages to get up and wraps the wire around the villain's neck. When Evan plunges the dagger into his third eye, both Luke and the zombie animals fall motionless. This confirms Richard's definitive defeat, but the Walner's spell also breaks. Evan barely recognizes Helga, and when he finds Lise in the barn basement, she is now an old woman. Additionally, the letters and maps scattered on the wall indicate terrible news. Richard wasn't the only sorcerer sent by the Nazis in the 1930s. There were 9 families in total, one for each of the Viking rune stones that were found. Evan stays with Lise until her end, which doesn't take long. The two brothers then set fire to the house and farm before returning home. Barb throws a party to celebrate her husband's return, and Evan begins studying the maps he brought from the farm. Locating the other families, he connects the points on the map and decides that he will continue fighting this terrible plague.